Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Wade T. Lightheart today with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast from Bioptimizers. And we are going to talk about a woman unleash, basically stress, trauma, and hormones. And our guest today is Dr. Sonya Jensen. And she is a naturopathic physician whose mission is to change the way women understand their bodies and themselves. She believes that women are the center of their families and communities, and therefore by supporting them, she is creating a ripple effect that will support the whole. Dr. Jensen is a mother of 2 boys, an author, a yoga teacher, podcaster, and workshop and retreat leader, runs her practice with her husband, where they help their community move into a state of thriving from survival. Her background in cell biology and her lived experience with Ayurvedic medicine in her home has given her insights into the human body that helps her serve the women and families she works with from multiple different lenses. She's the co-founder of Divine Elements Health Center, the Longevity Lab, and the Health Ignited Academy alongside her husband, Dr. Nicholas Jensen. Dr. Sonya believes it's everyone's birthright to live a happy, healthy, joyful, and abundant life. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. What an honor.
Yeah, it's so great. We were chatting before and commiserating about the state of affairs and freedom and stuff. That's a whole other conversation. But I think in this topic with your work, particularly with women and the ripple effect that it creates. And there's an old thing in marketing from a long time ago as well. There's 3 ways to market. You can go by telephone, television, or tell a woman, and tell a woman seems to be the most effective. And the research shows that women control 80% of the purchasing choices in the family. They're often the director around the food and health education for the family. Guys are kind of like, oh, there's odd ones, of course. But this is, I think, in today's kind of, the last 3 generations where women have entered into the professional world much more significantly, and all the wonderful opportunities that's provided. And I think that's great. I don't think we've figured it all out, how to, the changing roles and dynamics in family units. But I think it's safe to say that women, as a general rule, are the prime educators and prime facilitators of health in the home. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think women really are at the core of decision making. And I also think it's because of our nature and how we're just built differently than men when it comes to our physiology, when it comes to our how we see the world and the lens in which we see it through. We're kind of looking at it from a broad perspective, where I find with my counterpart, you give him a task, he's going to go from A to B and get it done. Right. Where for me, I'm here, I'm thinking about my kids right now. Okay, did they eat? Did they, I'm thinking about all these other areas of life at the same time. So the decisions that I make are going to be a little bit different than the decisions that my husband makes. And I often think that's the case because we were built to nurture. And because we were built to nurture, we're built to look at the community. We're built to look at the whole and how our one decision is going to serve it all. Yeah. So speaking to the fact that women really are making those decisions, doing the shopping, doing, cooking for the most part, things have changed, like you were saying, over the generations as women have kind of risen in their roles, or maybe not risen isn't the right word, but we've expanded our roles. So there is more of that shared duty with their counterparts at home. But I do still think it does fall on the woman to make those decisions for the family.
I deal with both genders extensively. But I get a lot more, what's the word I'm looking? Maybe a lot more concerns coming from women in the standpoint is that trying to be all things to all people with, like you said, the expanded options, but maybe a predominance, whether that is genetic or hormonal, or whether that is social, forget what, it's probably some mixture of all of those things. They're feeling stretched. They're feeling that they're doing more and feeling less competent as a general rule, or They're not superwoman that's on the cover of this or the Instagram model, or whatever it happens to be. There seems to be an extraordinary amount of pressure around women and the paradox of choice. One time you grew the garden at home, you got eggs from the neighbors, and you got vegetables from the ground, and your uncle down the road killed a cow, or whatever that model of health was very local, very rural. And you kind of went around, and my mother, for example, still lives a very much similar example. Like, so she had extra tomatoes this year because her tomatoes were good. Her neighbor had extra parsnips, so they do trades. And this is quite common in smaller communities. But today, in a much more, I would say, digitally dependent social structure, and where families are now living in more containerized lives, people are in their phones, are not as community oriented. How does this impact health choices that women make for their families or concerns? What have you noticed in your practice?
Yeah, just that, what you were saying, women really are feeling stretched in many different directions, not feeling enough in either one. And that belief that's been planted in them is the thing that I like to unravel. Because when we have that belief, the steps and actions that we have are going to be affected. And then that in turn is going to affect our life. So community for women is so important. So our feel-good hormone is oxytocin. And that is what we receive when we're in community with others. And we're receiving this support, not only from our little family, but the extended family, which is the village. And that village model, like you were saying, has been taken away unless you're in a rural area where it's more accessible. But innately, it's built in us to live that kind of a life, to support each other and to nurture each other. So when that gets taken away, and now we're trying to fill that void now with maybe significance through our work, or maybe importance through a role that we're playing in a certain job, or maybe that's always saying yes to all the school events, or however we tend to adapt and fill that void, does not nourish us. It actually starts to deplete us. So as it's depleting us, our hormones are changing, the way we look at ourselves is shifting, and we're waking up every day with that belief of not being enough in all of them, not being able to check off the whole to-do list because we're so caught up in our mind of all the various things that we have to do. And then that creates stress, that creates contraction and constriction, that doesn't allow space for dreaming and having that abundant mindset because we're just surviving. And anytime we're stuck in a state of survival, we don't make the best choices. We're just making choices like we were talking about before we started recording, that short term. We're only looking at what we're going to gain short term in that moment just to survive and go to the next moment, instead of really stretching our vision out to see how we can serve ourselves first and then be able to serve the world from a place of, yes, knowing that we now have fought for these rights to be equivalent or same as, however we want to frame it. But I think in that we lost what being a woman in today's world actually means. We've lost that capacity to be in the state of yin that actually has a lot of power. We're actually tapping more into that yang masculine energy so that we can survive, so that we can match the energy that's in the world. So I do think there's a shift happening. And I find anytime there's a shift happening in transition, there's always going to be challenge. And that's where the women that come to me are sitting in. They're sitting in that challenge of realizing that they've stretched themselves out way too much. Now the expectations are way up here from their community, from their families, from even themselves, and they're having to unravel that identity that they've created now and really having to reassess what they want for themselves.
What are some of the physiological consequences of these things that you've noticed in your practice? So walk me through maybe the type of, like, you've kind of made some, I think some succinct integrations of maybe the psychological components or the social components of what are pressuring women today. But who is the type of person that comes into your clinic to see you, to refer to you, and what challenges, I would say, are the physiological consequences of this social situation that we find ourselves in for women?
Yeah. So what I did in my book was I actually created a few archetypes, and one archetype is the Duchess. So she is the one that maybe she's a CEO or runs her own business, has her online business, is really motivated to get things done. She's the get her done gal, and she's on schedule. She's waking up at 5 a.m., working out. She knows what diet she's got. Like, she's got this edge of perfection in her life. And often what she's coming in to see me for is things like insomnia, anxiety, irregular cycles, and just in a state of buzziness that she can't come down from and even be present in her life. So that's going to show up, it's going to manifest differently for women, even in that kind of Duchess state. But I notice those are usually the common things that show up first.
Yep.
And then the problem gets deeper unless she starts to really listen to that.
I've got half a dozen female friends that fit that category.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, when I talk about in the book too, I talk about the polarities of the archetypes. So there's that polarity that may take us down this negative track, but the other polarity, the strengths, are also amazing. Like, she's the one that can get the job done. She's the one that you want on your team, you want as a leader. She's leading her family in ways where she's allowing space for them to grow too. So there's different parts of these archetypes that we can use to our advantage, but it's when we get caught up in it and we understand that the driving force behind that mask or that role that we're wearing with the Duchess is to gain either some significance, some connection, or some importance in our life. We then have to unravel where that's coming from, because it's showing up now in the physiology and in our body. So their cortisol is high, progesterone is low, there's irritability after they ovulate. So the PMS period, they're just irritated and angry. And that's not who they are at their essence, but it's showing up in their physiology that way. And then you have the damsel. So she's somebody that maybe sees everything kind of half empty and doesn't really use her voice because maybe it wasn't safe for her to use her voice as she was growing up. She's the one that says yes to everything, because again, she needs that connection, and she's gaining some sort of significance from saying yes to the school things, from saying yes to her family, from saying yes to everything, but then really stretching herself out and not using her voice to say no or create those boundaries. She's got thyroid issues. She's got maybe even things like cancer, because by saying yes, there's this internal resentment that starts to show up. So now there's growths showing up in our body. So maybe there's cysts on her ovaries, maybe there's fibroids during perimenopause. So these things really do imprint themselves in our physical form. And then the last one is the diva, where everything looks perfect on the outside, but there's chaos on the inside. And she grew up in a way where if she wasn't perfect, she was causing chaos, and maybe that wasn't safe for her. So she is going to be somebody that has issues with her cycle. There's going to be a lot of pain. Like, for her, it isn't until something stops her in her tracks that she's going to reassess that something's going on. So maybe it's really heavy bleeds and she can't leave her home. Maybe it's endometriosis because that safety issue. So all of these, like, the underlying theme I notice is the nervous system just hasn't gotten an opportunity to go into that state of parasympathetic, and she's stuck in this overdrive of sympathetic where she's just surviving fight, flight, freeze, or please. And then when we can start to create a pause between how she's responding to life after she receives a stimulus, that's when we start to open up some of her lens so she can understand where all of this is coming from.
I love the fact that you've kind of create these archetypes that helps people identify with maybe I think archetypes, and I'm a big fan of Carl Jung and his work and the origination of kind of the archetypical structure and in consciousness particularly, because I think what we're identifying here is there is a direct correlation between your conscious identification and how that plays out in your role in the world and the physiological impact that has. Yeah. The short-term, oftentimes advantage or disadvantage, and then there's the long-term thing. So how do you, and by creating those archetypes, it's a way to kind of not make it about me. It's just about, oh, I can identify with that. So sometimes it's an easier communication to make that, oh, that sounds like me. Opposed to it's me and I'm bad, or because I think a lot of people suffer from perfectionitis. Like, I don't want it, I'm flawed, or that I'm not well, or that things aren't working. That's a hard thing to do. Yeah. So what does a woman do if they find that they
Yeah.
like one of these, they're suffering from one of these archetypical conditions?
Right. Yeah. So I think it's important, like I said, with the Duchess, there's polarities to them too, right? So the damsel is the community keeper. Like she's the one that you lean on at 2 a.m. when you're having a challenge, because she's got her heart wide open to receive you. And with the diva too, she's the one you want on your team, because she's gonna, like, she's the warrior, right? So she's really gonna help support you. So when you look at the archetypes, you look at the polarities, and then you also understand that you are going to be one of these in different moments of your life. So
Right.
when I'm at the clinic, or when I'm making business decisions, I want to step into the Duchess so that I can use her gifts. When I'm at home and trying to create a nurturing environment for my children and my husband, maybe I want to step into the damsel a little bit so I can bring in more softness into my life. So I think we don't have to identify and then shame ourselves for being one of these. We can look at it and be like, wow, that is a role that I play and I have utilized, but now I'm going to utilize it for its gifts rather than utilizing in a way where I feel like I'm not enough and that's the mask I have to wear or the role I have to play in order to feel accepted and belong, and all the various things that kind of go on in our minds. I think that's where the beauty of self-discovery is, when we stay in curiosity of ourselves rather than attaching. Even in the self-help world, I feel like we can attach to things and label ourselves like, okay, I'm that person and that's just who I am, and have shame around that process. But really, there's so many gifts that we can receive from just understanding what happens to us when we're in that role. So I think that's how we can shift out of them when we need to.
So in your book,
Mhm.
Woman Unleashed, Stress, Trauma, and Hormones, what inspired you to write that book, and what's that book specifically addressing for people?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of what you were speaking to before. As I started working with women and understanding my own healing journey and story, and having that reflected back to me through the women that were coming to see me, I started to notice this trend. I started to notice that, no matter what they were eating, the herbs they were taking, they're doing all the right things. There was always something that still needed to be unveiled and released in order for full potential to be reached. And what I started to see is that the personality that we've created is a result of our experiences, of our past traumas. And those are big T traumas and also the micro moments and the micro traumas in our lifetime. It's also what we experienced while we were in the womb. It's also generational stuff that's been passed down. So we carry these stories and these beliefs with us that then help us create this personality and identity, which then creates the action of what food I'm going to choose or how I'm going to live my life. And then that fuels the physiology. And then now we have the physiology validating all the things that we're doing as it starts to speak to us. So I don't think many people put all of that together. Everything's so compartmentalized. So I really wanted women to have this understanding that our daily choices, those little things that we do every single day, have a profound effect. And often women believe that hormones are the cause of a problem. They don't realize that they're an effect. So our environment, whether it's the toxins that that are in the environment, or the toxic thoughts that we have, or the foods we're eating, or the lack of sleep, all the various things is what's creating communication between the brain and the rest of the body and our hormones. So if the environment isn't serving us, the hormones are just relaying information. That's all. So if we can change the environment, we can change that communication. So that really was the premise of the book. And the birthing of it really started for me more than 10 years ago, when I went through some of my traumas. And I went through a really hard divorce, and coming from an Indian community, that's just very frowned upon.
Right. That's really difficult. And that I have
Yeah. Yeah. So I did a lot of healing during that time and unraveling. And the realization I had is that I had a really big T trauma when I was around 8 years old that fueled every belief that I have about myself and every decision that I've made. And so when I had that awareness, all of a sudden my reproductive system started to change because I had PCOS, I had a swollen uterus, I had heavy periods, I had all these things. And again, I was doing the right things, but nothing was shifting. And so when I started to unpack that about myself, my relationship to my body started to change. My relationship to being a woman started to change because I wouldn't accept that. And again, being an Indian, Indo-Canadian young woman growing up, navigating two different cultures, I very much rejected being a woman because I'm like, it's so much easier being a man. So why wouldn't I want that for myself in my next life? Because we believe in past lives and future lives. And so that acceptance of myself started me on a journey of self-discovery, which I'm still on. But I knew that women needed to understand that. And that's kind of where the book birthed from.
It's awesome, and I love the cross-cultural challenges because we're seeing so much more of that. And Canada, of course, is a great example, I think, of a well done cultural integration. In that, no one in Canada, we always say, well, you don't say, hey, I'm a Canadian. You're like, well, I'm an Irish, German, Canadian, I'm an Indian. People automatically identify so that we can get a little bit of a gearing of what might be some of the values and traditions and cultural components are that included. And it's more of a fun sharing than maybe in other cultures. One of my favorite parts when I moved to the West Coast, I was growing up, I grew up on the East Coast of Canada, which didn't have a big multicultural component. But when I went to Vancouver, Canada, I was delighted with that aspect. However, the flip side, there's always advantages and disadvantages. Is now you have, like, for example, for my young Indian friends, second generation families in the Indian community, which came from a very traditional model in India, arranged marriages, these type of things. You're marrying into a cultural class structure. All the stuff is matched up. We've got the astrologer, this is very in-depth stuff. Yet you've grown up in this more westernized, where women have a freedom of choice and there's a more of a selection and maybe a non-traditional site. I could see where that would cause a lot of internal conflict. Is a lot of your clients facing that, those kind of internal conflicts for themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are so many, so much conditioning that we receive from our upbringing, and whether that's Indian culture, whether that's European culture, like every culture has its conditioning that's been passed down from generation to generation. So because of that, there's often internal battles. There's often this like part of us that's seeking this freedom and this expansion and wanting to understand ourselves in this new environment. And also our roots are so dug deep into this other culture that has so many gifts, but also can be quite, I don't know if strangulating is a word, but it can be very constricting depending on how the information was passed down. So I think there's often this internal battle that a lot of women feel of like, well, how do I behave? Because we're either getting information from social media, or we're getting information from this culture, and then finding our own way in that middle ground can be quite challenging, especially for the young women now. I feel like it's even more challenging. I think just identities in general are being challenged in so many different ways. So for me, I grew up in a really big family. So I have always felt very anchored and rooted, and I actually love my culture, like the pieces that I love, like the dancing. I grew up dancing and teaching and all the various things and the celebrations. And then there's those flip sides to all of that too. So for me, what I got to do was kind of separate myself for a couple of years. I lived in Southeast Asia for a few years just to, not find myself, but rediscover myself. Right. And
what part of Southeast Asia did you live?
In Taiwan, Cambodia, Thailand. I even went to India, which was really challenging for me because at that time there was quite a rift in my family because of my divorce. But that's where all the healing happened. When I landed in India after being away for almost a year and a half. And so I got to create a new relationship with my culture. I still love so many pieces, but I can see the other elements more clearly now. I don't have to attach myself to them. I know I don't have to identify with them. I can create boundaries. I can say no now. And it's still a work in progress. I think it always will be, but I think there is possibility to shift that internal battle. So again, the gifts of everything can start to serve us.
You touched on one little piece of this, and particularly pertaining to younger individuals, and that is the impact of social media. What are you seeing as the consequences and maybe strengths and liabilities of social media and how it's impacting people's health?
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
Anxiety and depression are so high and prevalent in young kids. I do work with a lot of teens, and I'm really seeing this detachment from identity almost, because they're not, I mean, that's the time in our life where our frontal cortex, it's all getting matured and it's growing and it's shifting, and we're understanding ourselves just a little bit better. But in that, they're feeling more and more confused and lost. There's more comparison, there's more competition, there's more bigger emotions around things that maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago wouldn't even existed, because everything's at their fingertips, the comparisons at their fingertips. And so when I see that, not only are their hormones being impacted, like young girls are getting their periods a lot earlier, and that's toxicity, that's all the various things. But because of that, they are more vulnerable. They are more susceptible to what they're seeing visually in social media, and understanding, oh, that's an identity of a woman. That's what I need to look up to. So I'm seeing a lot of angst, because I do feel like innately a part of us always knows what's true to us, but then we're being ripped open a little bit when we're in front of all these other images that maybe don't validate what we feel about ourselves. So that's that side. The other side of it, I feel like it's just opening this whole other lens for this generation of really being acceptable of everything. I feel like this new generation is more accepting of different people, of different cultures, of just life itself, and they're just more open, which is such a beautiful thing to see. And I think that's really going to serve humanity in so many different ways. But in that, I do really feel for them. I feel like they don't have their own identity, because until you have your own anchor, you can't expand yourself. So they're being pulled like they're in a tornado, not even knowing how to survive. And the generation that's the parents also don't know, because this is so new to us to have all this technology. And I think that's a challenge too. Like, I almost feel like there needs to be courses or support for parents that have young kids growing up in this generation that have the availability to look at all this technology, so that we can navigate them easier and not have so much angst around it ourselves. Because I know I was quite reluctant when it comes to technology. I still am in so many ways. And I have to remind myself that they're growing up in a very different time. And I mean, that's different than like looking at social media. Social media, they won't be getting for a long time. But, you know, when that is something that's showing up in your child's life, I think there needs to be support, and how we can have open conversations around it so they feel supported too.
Yeah, it's an certainly an evolving topic. I saw recently that,
Mhm.
of all places, China just implemented shut-off points. In other words,
Yeah,
time restricted social media access for younger people.
right.
In other words, at 10 o'clock, they can't go on anymore, and it doesn't fire back up till I think 7 or 8 or in
Mm.
something like that.
Mhm.
There's also, after they've watched something for a certain period of time, there's a note that comes up. Do you want to get up and move? And so
Mm.
we're starting to, obviously, in a more authoritarian culture, they're able to implement those restrictions a little easier.
Right.
There's the social dilemma that was
Mhm.
recently out and talking about the addictive nature of technology and its formation and neurochemical formation,
Yeah.
neuroscience, how your axons and dendrites and how your brain actually forms and I identifies.
Mm.
What do you see as the, for parents that see their kids maybe going in a direction that they're concerned about and don't know what they should do around their health? Like, for example,
Mhm.
I have a lot of friends that their kids don't want to go out and play. They want to be
Right.
on their computers, or they're, as you said, kind of almost mute and not connected inside of family settings. Like they'll get online and be very animated and social with their friends
Yeah.
in that environment, and you can see the what's your suggestions around that? How do we navigate this, or what do you know, or do you have
Yeah.
any suggestions, or how do you have conversations,
Yeah.
or what do you do?
Yeah, I think first is checking ourselves, right? Because for this technology space is also very new for us as parents. So some things that we've noticed with ourselves, a lot of our work ends up being on the phone. And when we're on our phone, the child doesn't see. I mean, my children are a little bit younger, so it's a little bit different. They're 7 and 10. And so when my youngest sees me on the phone and he's doing some art and wants to show that to me, if I'm not pausing and looking at him in his eyes and meeting him where he is, he's now experiencing that, okay, that is more important. So as soon as I get my hands on that, that's how I'm going to behave. So I do think as parents, we have a responsibility to understand the impact that the technology is having on us first, and then having that open conversation with them. So what we've started doing with our children, we have Sunday night meetings. So in those Sunday night meetings, we talk about all the various things, the challenges that we're having and what we're hoping for each other. And technology is a big part of that discussion, because I bought them their first game console this Christmas. I got them a Nintendo Switch only because you can play active games on it. And luckily, my children like to go outside. So what we've discussed is we openly speak about the effects of all of it. And I think what happens is often we think kids don't understand, but I do think they understand. We just have to keep planting seeds and really talking to them like they're in the know. Like, this is what technology does. And at the end of the day, it's going to be your choice, because we can only control so much. And what are the choices you're going to make? They probably won't make good choices in the beginning, but the seeds that you plant will be there and they will come back to that. That's what I figured out so far. I know there's many other ways to probably communicate this, but I find the more open I am with them, the more they understand. Because if I just yell at them, okay, it's been half an hour, it's been an hour, it's time to come, they don't understand. They need to take something to completion, or they feel like it's not a big deal. I can just do this all day and I'm happy. So what's the problem? So when I start talking to them, educating them about their health and my health, and just openly conversate about all these things, I find that changes the energy, because now they don't feel like I'm talking at them, but I'm actually creating an environment where they feel safe to project their opinion and also are involved in the decision making.
It's beautiful. Going back to maybe the book, what have you seen? And you said something really powerful in that statement, and that is, once we recognize our relationship with technology, then we're in a position where we can communicate the advantages or disadvantages with our kids. But what have you seen with your clients that, they've cast themselves into one of the caricatures or the archetypes, and they started recognizing maybe patterns and shifting those patterns and maybe changing them? What do you see the impact, going back to the ripple effect, carrying over to their families?
Yeah. So, I mean, first it's going to be her process. And often it actually starts with grief, Because once you recognize that a big part of your life had to do with these micro moments or these other big moments, there's some grief around what could have been or what happened. And then they kind of move into anger, and then they kind of move in, there's these movements that kind of happen within them. And then it kind of reaches this point where all of a sudden that space is opened up, that space between that stimulus and that response. So now all of a sudden they become observers. So as they become observers of themselves, they're now observing their families in a very different way, because now they're starting to feel more steady and understanding that they are not who they thought they were, and they don't have to identify with who they thought they were, or the beliefs, or all the thoughts, the 60 to 80,000 thoughts that we have in our mind. So now their response to their child that might be having a tantrum or might be moving through their own experience is going to be very different, because now they can pause and breathe and understand that what that child is going through has nothing to do with them. It's their own experience. Because as parents, I find what we do is we project a lot. We right away go into this framework in our mind that, oh, their reaction is because of me. And we take blame and shame and guilt, and we start doing all of that. And then we go into reaction. And so that creates this miscommunication and disconnect within the family unit. But the more connected the woman starts to feel with herself, like with her true essence, the more connected she can feel with her entire family, and create space for the family to move through their own stories without wrapping ourselves in their story. So I find what happens is there's just more peace in their home and within themselves. I remember when I had my second, who was very different than my firstborn really tricked me, and I thought, oh, I could have 5 of these. And then my second one came with a very different energy, and I felt very depleted when he was around 2 years old. So I went to a ladies camp, a yoga camp that I used to go to every year. And I remember when I came back, he had shifted. And it's not that he did anything different. He was just being himself. I shifted, and how I was responding to him shifted. So that created a very different connection between the two of us. So I do feel the more we work on ourselves, the easier it is for the family, not to put the whole burden on a woman, because, everyone has to do their part. But I do find there's more ease in all relations.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, I think, since you kind of touched on that, and that is the role of, say, the modern woman, family, and then maybe marital status or relationship status. And now with the changing roles that are happening and these pressure points, first, you might be in a situation where you're having one expectation, you decided you don't want to do that, you go in a different direction, and you've got to communicate that to your partner, or you've got to communicate your partner, hey, we've got to make some shifts here. I'm sure you deal with a lot of that as women are making. So what are some of the challenges, or what are some of the opportunities that come up in those type of situations when women are really going after to healing themselves?
Yeah. So I think first understanding how different we really are, our physiology and our brains. So there's a chapter in the book that I do speak to that. And one aspect that I speak to is that all men and women carry a yin and yang energy, right? And so a female yin energy, there's more softness, it's nurturing, it's more about being and being connected. And from that space is truly where our power comes from. And we can get so much done from that space because it's done with ease. The yang component of feminine energy is going to be more action oriented. She's going to be the warrior that is, it's the mama bear that's going to come out when things need to go into action. So understanding that we have those elements, and understanding that men too have those elements, that for a male that's more in his yang, he is going to be more action, task oriented. He's going to get things done. Whereas his yin component is going to be a little bit more of that softness as well, and like that peaceful warrior. So understanding that about our counterparts is important. And then behavioral endocrinology, knowing that for men, it's testosterone. So for them, again, it's point A to point B, getting that task done to completion. And for women, it's oxytocin. We've got 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A going on at the same time. Women use both sides of our hemisphere at the same time, whereas men go from one to the other. So recognizing that we operate in different ways. So we're going to be successful in different ways, in different roles. And once we know that, I think we have more grace towards ourselves. So we don't put so much pressure that we need to do the same, or we have this expectation of our partner to fill that oxytocin as a girlfriend would, where he can't. There's a meme that I saw that made me laugh once. It's a couple in bed and they're facing out, and the woman is kind of looking over at him saying, I wonder what he's thinking about. He's probably thinking about another woman. And she's just, going into this cycle that's not serving her. And he was thinking, I wonder if the Transformers have auto insurance or life insurance. And so not to like make things like simpletons or anything like that, but it's more understanding that the brains operate in a different way can create an understanding between the couple. And Nick and I go through this a lot because we have a business together. We are parenting together. We are doing life together. We have many similar dreams. And so we are often having to check and understand where his strengths are and where mine are, and if that's balanced. And sometimes it's not, often it's not. And I have to speak up and say, look, I'm really having to step into my yang a lot right now. It's draining me. So where can you shift? Or the other way around, if he's needing more softness from me, but I can't give it because I'm doing accounting or I'm doing these other elements in our business. So I think the more curious we become about how we operate in the world, we then can shift things to serve that. Just like in our monthly rhythm, if we know our monthly rhythm of what hormones go up and down, we can eat according to that. We can move our body according to that. So the more in tune we are, the more in rhythm we can be with ourselves.
When you, the fact that you have a yoga background, I think, which is so important to what's interesting, you have this, thousands of year practice, which is maybe even more applicable today than it's ever been, which is pretty extraordinary. But the foundations of yoga, of course, are yama and niyama, the do's and don'ts, or the things that you should encourage and the things that you should try to discourage or avoid. What are some of the do's and don'ts that you would say from a cellular physiological component, or cellular biology and your background and expertise, that you would suggest for people just listening to this right now, some things that they need to eliminate and some things that they need to do moving forward?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I'll kind of lay it out for a woman's cycle first, right? Understanding that hormonal piece and understanding that your cells are responding to your environment. And that's where all the communication is happening. So the receptors on your cells are going to be activated according to its environment. So for example, for women, if our progesterone is doing what it needs to do, it will activate the GABA receptors and we will feel calm. So for example, in the first half of our cycle, understanding that after we bleed, we can move more, we can be more action oriented, we can be more in that yang state, we can be more outwardly in the world, and we can fast more, we can be in keto, like just knowing that that's what I can do at that time is going to help us make decisions and do the things necessary to serve our body then. And then come ovulation, things shift a little bit. Testosterone's up a little bit. So yes, libido is going to be a little bit higher, but our food choices are going to change as we move into the luteal phase. Now, maybe we need healthier carbs because now we have to nurture progesterone. So progesterone is our nurturing hormone. Libido will go down. We will want to be more introverted. We will want more connection with the earth. We will want to slow down and maybe just do yoga and walk and do those kinds of movement in that phase so that we can serve the physiology then, and the hormones can actually bind to the right receptor at that time. So if we follow that rhythm, we can then serve our whole system. But what happens is we get a routine, we get stuck in that routine, and then we do the same thing every single day, the same foods every single day, and we lose variation. So the don't is you don't want to be doing the same thing every single day, right? You want variation in your life. And that's for everyone across the board, whether it's the season changing and you change how you eat and you move and you live, whether that's your monthly cycle. For men, you have a daily cycle that's shifting all the time. So understanding your cycles will help you understand what you can do or can't do. So for women later on in life too, knowing that weightlifting is actually really important, like resistance workout is really important, but that can also shift during your cycle. So I think understanding yourself and knowing that women need to be more than do. So that could be, every day having a ritual of having a cup of tea to remind your nervous system that, yes, I'm listening, I'm here. And maybe for men, it's something different, right? Maybe they need to chop wood. I don't know, right? It could be anything. So there's got to be something that elevates that relationship with your natural state.
That's good. And how would you say understanding that would differ, say, from women to men? You kind of explained the female cycle a little bit, but if you're in relationship, understanding
Yeah.
the male cycle, because I see there's a lot of traction right now understanding the female cycle, and it's on a
Right.
it's that 28-day circle or
Yeah.
whatever, and there's what you illustrated. How about from a man's perspective? I'm curious from my own standpoint.
Yeah, for sure. So men's cycle is daily. It's a 24-hour cycle. So there's pulsations of hormones that are happening various times throughout the day. So to understand from my understanding of working with some men, but my husband is more of the expert in that area. And from what I've learned from him is that variation is key on a daily, for a daily practice. So what I do is, my Ayurvedic background, I'm going to connect, okay, there is this level of testosterone that needs to be served. Okay, what's the constitution? Is he more of a Pitta constitution? So that's more of that medium build, more heat. Okay, so now we got to serve movement that's going to serve both of those things. So that's going to be things that are going to, really invigorate their bodies. Whereas maybe that person is more vata, so they need more slower movement. So for example, for my husband, his normal state is really physical. So he needs to do more meditation every day, because that's not his normal state, to be still and to be in that being mode. He's a doer. Whereas for me, I can be like, I can step into meditation within a second. I need to do physical work every morning. So that's my sense with the cycle there. And, there's so many things that influence men's cycle, like the estrogens from our environment, the stresses that men are going through today, because I do think men too are grappling with different identities now because of the shift that's happened with women. I do feel for men, and Nick and I have had these conversations too, that they also don't know how to navigate this power that they're sensing in women and wanting to honor that. And at the same time, not knowing where they fit in that family dynamic then, when women also are stepping into some of that yang. So I think there has to be some like play in that. And there's a great exercise that one of our coaches gets the two of us to do. And we look at each other and we say to one another, what is it about me that I wish you understood more? And the other person can't respond, but you just keep speaking back and forth until you've reached some depth of what needs to happen. So I feel like that will build more understanding between both genders.
It's beautifully said. I haven't heard that. That's unique. I'm going to try that question myself. What do you see for the future, the next 10 to 20 years in women's health, particularly? Your book is kind of addressing that specifically. Do you see competing pathways, a divergence? Do you see a singular kind of direction? What do you see as a practitioner who's dealing with a lot of women?
Yeah.
And where do you think this all goes?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited for the future. I'm already noticing a change, and that's probably my yogic background talking now, is just looking at us moving into this more Aquarian age where the feminine energy really is rising for a reason. And that all that means is more connection is coming. We are now, I feel like, in that transition state that women are in before we give birth. There's that moment where everything's shaky and everything is unsteady and uncertain, and there's an unknown, but then this beautiful baby is birthed after that. I feel like we are there and we're moving towards connection, deeper connection. I do think the old paradigm is dissolving. The patriarchy is shifting. I think both are going to exist together in a way where there's connection and understanding. So I do think women's health, like there's more studies done now on women, which, women listening, you may not know that most studies that are done for women are not done on women. So I think that awareness itself is going to change the direction of that kind of medicine. But I think in general, there is more community coming. Just the women that I've attracted into my life lately who are wanting to do more and more together, to band together, to create community, to recognize that that village living that we are all craving is necessary, and it has to just look different in this modern world. And that is going to be the way. I feel like we're going to go into the ways things used to be, but from a modern perspective.
Wow, I like that future and that vision. Where can people find your book, find out more about you, follow you, social media, all of those things that, because you've brought some great insights, and I would encourage people to grab a copy of your book and to find out more about your work and what you're doing and how you're supporting this emergence of female opportunity in the modern world.
Yeah, thank you.
Where can we find you?
Yeah, so Instagram at Dr. Sonya Jensen, and my website's drsonyajensen.com. And the book you can grab off Amazon, Indigo, Barnes and Nobles, or you could just go to womanunleashedbook.com and it'll give you different pathways from there.
Great interview. One last question I have, and what would you say to a woman who might be listening to this that is maybe understands that something needs to shift? What does she need to do? Like how does she go from where she is to a direction that is more in aligned with her soul?
Yeah, you just have to notice that you are important. And the moment that you do that, then the ripple effect will happen within the decisions that you make, that you are worth it. You are here on purpose. There was a very specific sperm and ovum that came together to create you, and it's your birthright. So your next step is to seek out that village and that community and that support that are going to bring your brilliance into the world.
Well, that's awesome. And this is the Awesome Health Podcast, Way-T Lightheart from Bioptimizers. You have it. That's right from Dr. Sonya Jensen, a naturopathic physician who has written a book called Woman Unleashed. And it's all about stress, trauma, and hormones, how to navigate the world that we find ourselves in today to birth a brilliant future for all of us and all of humanity. I want to thank you for joining us today. If you like this, share it, hit a like button. If you hate it, give us the comments. I love both sides of it. We love having you here today, Dr. Sonya, and we love having you, our listener. We'll see you on the next episode of the Awesome Health Podcast. See you later.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.